In the UFC, if you don't do things their way, you get sidelined fast. Skip media, blackmail them publicly, or make crazy demands, and that behavior usually gets you punished. But Conor McGregor did all of it. And instead of losing leverage, he gained more power than any fighter in the history of the sport.
The notorious Conor McGregor!
So where does leverage in the UFC actually come from? And how did Conor McGregor take control of it? Peak Conor McGregor was unlike anything we'd seen in the octagon before.
Who the f is that guy? Who the f is that? You know damn well who I am. Who the f is that? Oh my God.
Shut your f***ing mouth, you'll do nothing. You'll do nothing. Not one of you'll do nothing. Get the f*** out of here. Get the f*** out of here.
His trash talk was completely unmatched and like a whole other level of mental warfare. But the important thing is, he backed it all up. And the most legendary example of that was at UFC 194 when he faced Jose Aldo. Aldo hadn't lost in over a decade. He defended his title 7 times and was considered the greatest featherweight in UFC history. McGregor had been talking for months about how fast he'd finish him.
I own Rio de Janeiro. So for him to say he is the king and I am the joker, if this was a different time, I would invade his favela on horseback and kill anyone that was not fit to walk. But we are in a new time, so I'll whoop his ass in July.
Most people assumed it was just talk, but 13 seconds later, Aldo was unconscious on the canvas. It was the fastest title fight finish in UFC history. McGregor had called the knockout down to the exact technique he'd use. He'd visualized it so many times in training that when the moment came, it looked rehearsed.
He practiced it. He predicted it was happening. He knew Aldo's movements. He had it timed down, and he's like much more light on the foot. And as Aldo moves forward, he times it perfectly. Bam! Look at that.
The trash talk before the fight had been relentless. He mocked his legacy, his fighting style, everything. All designed purely to get under Aldo's skin. And it worked. Aldo came out aggressive, emotional, and abandoned the patient approach that had made him unbeatable for 10 years. One mistimed exchange and McGregor landed clean. The fight was over before it started.
It was such a picture-perfect punch, too.
Yeah, I mean,
And he slides back, boom, drops that left hand. And
The visualization, the trash talk, the confidence, it wasn't an act. Conor genuinely believed he was untouchable, and for that moment, he was right. The UFC had never seen anything like it. A fighter who could sell a fight better than the promotion itself and then deliver a finish that justified all the hype. That kind of certainty doesn't just appear overnight. 5 years earlier, that same fighter was waking up at 5 a.m. as a plumber's apprentice.
I had no job, I had no... If this didn't go ahead, then what had I got? I had nothing, right. You know what I mean? That definitely weighs on you at times. You know what I mean? That as a man, you have no money, you're relying on other people for support, you know what? I didn't want to be doing that.
Conor McGregor spent 2.5 hours commuting to construction sites in freezing darkness, then another 2.5 hours back home in traffic. The work was cold, damp, and repetitive.
It was just a horrible, horrible time, and I was like, you know what? I don't want to do this, and then I just left, and then I just stopped going, didn't get out of bed. Then my dad would come in and try and bait me out of bed, and we'd have fights, and literally, for a good while I didn't really speak to my dad. We just kind of stayed away from each other.
I lasted 18 months doing it. But it was tough, you know what I mean? It wasn't the life for me, you know what I mean? And then John said, because I was training with John as well at the time, and then John got in touch and says, I have a show, I'm running a show, I'd like to fight on it. And then that was it.
His parents expected him to finish the apprenticeship and build a stable career. Instead, he quit and told his father he'd become a millionaire by 25. His father laughed. His son was 19 years old with no professional fighting experience and no plan other than that vague idea of being a pro fighter. And it wasn't like Ireland was a machine pumping out UFC champions. The sport barely existed there. Conor had no income, no sponsors, and no way to support himself. So he went on government welfare. He started training at Straight Blast Gym under John Kavanagh, a coach who was Ireland's first ever BJJ black belt. Kavanaugh saw potential in him quickly.
He just seems to have all these factors that any one of them individually is rare, and he's got 10 of them. It's a once in a generation athlete.
But their first week together almost ended the relationship. During a sparring session, Conor dropped a male training partner, then went too hard against a female teammate, putting her on the ground in tears. Kavanaugh literally said, "I'm next," stepped in, put gloves on, and beat the hell out of him. Conor's response was simple. He knew he deserved it and showed up the next day, ready to train properly. He started fighting in Cage Warriors, a regional European promotion where prize money was minimal. He'd collect his welfare check, train multiple sessions a day, and sleep in his girlfriend's car when it broke down in the parking lot.
I used to drive my girlfriend's little Peugeot 206, and I don't really have Peugeot 206s over in America or wherever you are, but they're little small bangers, yeah? And there was smoke coming out of the engine. It used to shake down the road. But in my head, I was cruising down the Las Vegas Strip in a soft-top Ferrari F430 with the Dom beside me.
He lost twice early on, submissions that exposed his weakness to grappling, but he kept fighting anyway. By December 2012, he'd gone on an 8-fight win streak and became Cage Warriors' first ever simultaneous 2-division champion.
Because no matter what happens, no one can take these away from me, you know what I mean? People can say shit, they don't say stuff about me or whatever, no one can take these away from me.
He was still on welfare. He was still broke, but his father wasn't laughing anymore. Tony McGregor started telling taxi customers about his son's $1 million left hook. The kid who quit plumbing to chase an impossible dream had backed it up with results.
Just keep positive and again, keep believing, keep training, keep trying to learn every day, trying to learn new shit every day. And that's it. If the call comes, the call comes. Just believe in yourself. Believe that you're better than everyone else. You know what I mean? When I was always looking at fights or looking at anything, obviously I can do this. I'm as good as that. Just believe in yourself and be cocky and be confident and be humble. Train hard. That's it.
He'd proven he could fight at an elite level, but the question wasn't whether Conor could win fights on the regional scene. It was whether he could force the UFC to notice him and whether they'd actually give him a shot.
It was actually April Fool's Day, I think, so that even made me more think somebody that they're hacking the UFC email here and they're winding me up.
But it wasn't actually a prank. On April 6, 2013, Conor McGregor stepped into the UFC for the first time in Stockholm, fighting Marcus Brimage on the prelims. He knocked out Brimage in 67 seconds.
It can just change like that, you know what I mean? 1 minute and 7 seconds I go from being known to having money to me name.
Dana White noticed immediately. He said McGregor walked into the octagon like it was his 100th UFC fight, not his first. Completely relaxed, totally confident.
I always knew I only need one chance. I always felt I was better than everybody. I always felt all I needed was to get in there once. Just give me one shot and I'll take it home. I'll steal it every time. And then so when I got the call, I knew I wasn't hanging around. I was going to call out everyone in the division. I was going to make my way up to the top as fast as possible because I felt I was ready.
But it wasn't just the fighting that impressed Dana. It was McGregor's ability to make people want to watch. Over the next 2 years, McGregor fought Max Holloway in Boston, Diego Brandao in Dublin, and Dustin Poirier in Las Vegas. Every single time, the energy in the arena was different. When he fought in Boston, thousands of Irish American fans packed the TD Garden. Irish flags everywhere, chanting before he even touched gloves.
I am an Irish legend, man. I'm a living legend. Yeah, I see myself as the champ already.
Already? You're the featherweight champion already?
Yeah, of course. I see myself as the champ from day one. Before I even started training, I always saw myself as the champ. That's how I see myself. I visualized myself already there. I visualized everything. I visualized this conversation. I visualized the walkout. I visualized everything going on. I know I have shots picked out that I'm going to throw in this fight in 5 weeks. You know what I mean? I've seen everything in my head, and now it's going to happen. You see it in your head, you're going to see it before your eyes. That's what I say.
But what made him irreplaceable wasn't the knockouts or the sold-out arenas. It was the trash talk. Every time McGregor did a press conference, he generated millions of dollars worth of free media coverage. For most fighters, promoting the event meant the UFC had to spend a ton on advertising. McGregor's trash talk pretty much did the job for them.
It's red panty night when you sign to fight me, yeah? Just please show up December 12th. So I don't want to scare him anymore. He's petrified. He went running before. So now I'm going to take the opposite approach. Cuddle him, look after him, whisper sweet nothings, tell him it's going to be all right. It will be over quick. And hopefully get him into that octagon December 12th and then end his career. Suck these big Irish balls!
One press conference would get picked up by MMA media, then sports media, then mainstream outlets. McGregor was marketing the fights himself. By the time he knocked out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds at UFC 194, McGregor had become one of the biggest draws in UFC history. 1 year later, at UFC 205, Madison Square Garden, he knocked out Eddie Alvarez to become the first fighter ever to hold 2 UFC titles simultaneously. And that's when he delivered one of his best lines yet, the kind of moment that turns you into a legend.
I've spent a lot of time, Joe, slating everybody in the company. Backstage, I'm starting fights off everybody. I've ridiculed everyone on the roster. I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I'd like to take this chance to apologize to absolutely nobody. The double champ does what the he wants. Let me raise this.
The crowd went insane. From that point on, he was so valuable that the UFC couldn't afford to lose him. And while everyone was focused on his fights, he was already building the leverage that would change everything. In July 2014, before he'd even headlined a major UFC card, Conor incorporated McGregor Sports and Entertainment Limited in Dublin. In 2016, he filed trademarks for Conor McGregor, The Notorious, and The Mac Life. Most fighters don't own their own names, which means they can't control how their image gets used or who profits from their merchandise. McGregor locked down his intellectual property before anyone realized how valuable it would become. Instead of thinking like a fighter trying to win belts, he was thinking like a brand trying to scale.
We are sitting on a boxing ring in front of your logo, my friend.
I'm happy you brought that up,
Yes.
the logo. That's, I mean, every day I get into that ring and I stare at it and I'm like, it's some logo, isn't it? The big lion's head with the crown and McGregor Sports and Entertainment next to the UFC. It's been some journey. It's been an absolutely amazing journey. I'm very, very proud of myself and very proud of everyone that's been with me. The distance we've come in such a short space of time.
That focus on the branding began with his whole look and image, and the more successful he got, the more expensive his look became. Almost every press conference, every weigh-in, every public appearance, McGregor showed up in custom-tailored suits, not off-the-rack clothing.
Yeah, it's a pinstripe suit from a distance, and then you get up real close, stick your glasses on your top, and it just says "fuck you" on the stripe. So it's just a beautiful suit.
He walked in wearing Gucci, Dolce & Gabbana, and luxury watches worth more than most fighters made in a year. He drove expensive cars, posted photos in private jets, and surrounded himself with green, gold, and Celtic imagery. To be a Conor McGregor fan meant you were buying into his whole lifestyle. And it worked. By 2020, McGregor had more than 33 million Instagram followers. Today, he's approaching 50 million followers, almost as many as the UFC's official account. For comparison, John Jones, widely considered the greatest fighter ever, has about 10 million followers.
The support of the people means a lot to me, you know. I do this to entertain the people, you know. This is for my fans and my people who believe in me, and not so much anything that's gonna, just my lack of commitment. I think the people who believe in me and support me, they deserve better, and I wish to give them that, and I will, and I am. I know, like you said, people can see that I'm putting in the work, and I'm putting in the focused work, and that's why we're all in good spirits.
McGregor's social media presence was worth tens of millions of dollars to sponsors. And that's important because in combat sports, the traditional relationship is simple. The brand has power, and the fighter borrows status. You wear Nike, and Nike's credibility transfers to you. You get a Reebok deal, and Reebok elevates your image. McGregor flipped it. Brands started borrowing status from him, which meant Reebok needed McGregor more than McGregor needed Reebok. He even started creating his own luxury brands. August McGregor launched in 2017, giving fans a way to dress like him.
Today, I am very proud to introduce my first complete collection of modern suiting, sport coats, accessories, and casual wear. David and I have worked diligently over the years to redefine custom clothing.
It's been a long but focused goal of ours to offer a great make with beautiful styling. Be strong, be powerful.
And he already had the Mac Life as his own media production company, giving him complete control over his narrative with no UFC gatekeepers and no traditional media filters, just direct access to his audience. So with his own fashion line, his own content platform, and his own trademark portfolio, he essentially had total control over his image. That made him different from every other UFC fighter. GSP, Anderson Silva, John Jones, they were all phenomenal athletes, but they stayed within the system. They let the UFC control their image, their merchandise, their narrative. McGregor built his own system. When sponsors wanted to work with him, they had to go through his company, and when media wanted access, they had to play by his rules. The next step was proving he didn't need the UFC's infrastructure at all. And that's exactly what his social media empire accomplished. Historically, the UFC has always controlled the narrative, the access, the timing of announcements. Fighters showed up when they were told, said what they were supposed to say, and followed the promotional schedule. McGregor opted out. He tweeted his own retirements, announced fights himself before the UFC could, and showed up late whenever he wanted.
Sorry I'm late, I just don't give a f***.
The organization had never dealt with a fighter who could bypass them entirely and still reach so many people. The breaking point came with the UFC 200. In April 2016, the UFC announced that McGregor would fight Nate Diaz in the main event at UFC 200 in July, the biggest card of the year. Then McGregor refused to fly to Las Vegas for the mandatory press conference, saying he needed to focus on training in Iceland. The UFC pulled him from the card entirely. Dana White said no fighter was bigger than the promotion, and McGregor would follow the rules like everyone else. But McGregor didn't back down, and he announced his retirement on Twitter instead. The tweet went viral and reached millions of people, generating more media coverage than any official UFC statement could have. Before long, the UFC reversed course and put him back on a different card. Essentially, McGregor tested the machine and discovered the UFC needed him more than he needed them. And it's a move he pulled again in 2019.
Conor McGregor might have retired, maybe, kind of, sort of. At about 1 a.m. East Coast time last night, he sent a tweet saying the following, quote, "Hey guys, quick announcement. I've decided to retire from the sport formerly known as mixed martial art today. I wish all of my old colleagues well going forward in competition. I now join my former partners on this venture, already in retirement. Proper pina coladas on me, fellas."
Conor knew, even at this point, he'd already built the ultimate leverage. But all of this, the brand, the social media empire, the complete control over his narrative, only mattered because of one thing. The numbers. A standard UFC pay-per-view in the mid-2010s generated around 300,000 buys, which brought in roughly $18 million in revenue. McGregor's events regularly hit over 1 million buys. UFC 229 against Khabib did 2.4 million buys, the largest pay-per-view in UFC history.
The pay-per-view buys were insane. 2.4 million, I believe.
Yep.
Was it the highest at that time?
Yeah, I mean,
That's crazy.
the only
pay-per-view.
The only pay-per-view that beat that was Conor and Floyd.
McGregor was adding $30 to $40 million in extra revenue per event, and sometimes even more, according to ESPN's reporting. Across 2015 and 2016, McGregor generated approximately $372 million in pay-per-view revenue across his fights. His disclosed earnings for that same period were $25 million, which meant he only got around 7% of the revenue he personally created.
And you look at the amount of money that he's brought into the organization of all the times he's fought, he's the most underpaid athlete of all time. Let that sink in.
For comparison, top boxers at his level typically earned 60 to 65% of event revenue. McGregor was being paid a fraction of what fighters with his drawing power earned in other sports. The gap was massive, and McGregor knew it. If he was generating $30 million or more per fight, why would he accept standard purses that paid him a tiny percentage of that? But McGregor couldn't renegotiate his UFC contract to match his real market value while he was locked into the standard fighter compensation model. The UFC had monopoly control, and fighters had no alternatives. So McGregor did something no UFC fighter had ever done before. He walked away from the octagon entirely and negotiated a boxing match with Floyd Mayweather, the highest paid athlete in combat sports. And that fight changed everything about how McGregor saw his own worth. The UFC initially said it would never happen. Dana White called it impossible. McGregor was under exclusive contract, and the organization had the legal power to block it. But McGregor negotiated directly with Mayweather anyway, partnered with Showtime and CBS, and forced the UFC into a corner. They could either sue their biggest star and create a public relations disaster, or take a cut of the revenue and let it happen. The UFC took the money.
Conor might win a boxing match. I mean, maybe there's like a small percentage chance that he just runs in there and clips Floyd with a big shot and rocks him and then takes him out. I don't know what that percentage is, but if you ask a boxing expert, there's like 4%, 5%, right? That's what a boxing expert would say, which I'm not, but I'm an MMA expert. And if they fought in an MMA fight, it's 100% that Conor would fuck him up. 100%. No ifs, no ands, no buts, no chance.
On August 26, 2017, McGregor stepped into the boxing ring at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. The fight sold 4.3 million domestic pay-per-view buys and an estimated 6.7 million globally, the second highest in combat sports history.
They were part of the promotion.
Yeah,
they made
a lot
hundreds of
money,
millions
yeah.
of dollars off that thing. Everybody made a load of money. I mean, Mayweather made hundreds of millions. Conor made 100 million. I don't know what the UFC made. Everybody got fucking crazy paid.
Total revenue reached around $700 million, and McGregor's earnings were estimated between $85 and $130 million. The UFC received approximately $50 million as his promoter, even though they had nothing to do with organizing the event. In one night, he made what would have taken him years of UFC fighting to accumulate. But the real shift is what the fight proved. The world tour leading up to the event, the trash talk, the viral press conferences, the sold-out arenas, showed that McGregor could carry a global event without the UFC's brand attached to it.
You nothing. And while we're at it, Showtime too. You little weasel. Look at you, you little weasel. I can see it in your eyes. You're a
He didn't need their promotional machine to generate attention or sell pay-per-views. He'd proven that alternatives existed outside the organization, and those alternatives paid him a hell of a lot more per event than the UFC ever had. After Mayweather, the UFC couldn't treat him like a standard fighter anymore. He had genuine leverage now because the threat of him walking away was real. Boxing promoters would pay him 9 figures for a single fight. The UFC's standard compensation structure suddenly looked absurd by comparison. And McGregor had FU money, which meant the organization had lost the one thing that kept fighters in line, being dependent on the payday. So when McGregor returned to the octagon, he didn't come back as an employee. He came back demanding something the UFC had never given anyone before: ownership.
Conor McGregor is going to get back into the octagon just as soon
as he becomes an owner of the octagon.
Owner of said octagon.
To be clear, McGregor's demand wasn't new. He'd asked for it before, right after UFC 205 in November 2016, when he became the first ever 2-division champion.
Where's my share? Where's my equity? If I'm the one that's bringing this, I mean, they've got to come talk to me now. That's all I know. I've got both belts, a chunk of money, a little family on the way. You want me to stick around? You want me to keep doing what I'm doing? Let's talk, but I want the ownership now. I want the equal share. I want what I deserve, what I've earned.
Back then, WWE IMG had just bought the UFC for $4 billion and let 23 celebrities buy small stakes for $250,000 each. Conan O'Brien owned a piece of the company. Mark Wahlberg owned a piece. Serena Williams owned a piece. McGregor had generated hundreds of millions in pay-per-view revenue and owned nothing. Back then, Dana White refused his request. Would it be any different this time? After the Mayweather fight, McGregor had leverage White couldn't ignore, but even so, Dana refused to cave.
And he said, I feel like I should own a piece of the company. I said, Conor, you know that's never going to happen.
Not because the demand was unreasonable, but because granting it would set a precedent the UFC couldn't afford. If McGregor got equity, other fighters would demand it too. and that opened the door to unionization, collective bargaining, and labor disputes the organization had spent decades avoiding. Fighters were basically independent contractors with no union and no collective power. Giving one fighter ownership would destabilize the entire system, so White said no formal equity ever. So Conor tried a different approach. He said the UFC had to entice him to return. White still refused to give him equity, but McGregor's team started talking publicly about building his own enterprise if ownership wasn't on the table. This was a fork in the road. McGregor stopped trying to own the UFC and started building everything around it instead. If they wouldn't let him be a partner inside the organization, he'd become one outside of it. In September 2018, Conor signed a new 6-fight deal structured to make him the highest paid fighter in the sport. When he fought Khabib at UFC 229 a month later, his disclosed purse was $3 million. His actual earnings were estimated around $50 million. The difference was massive, and it revealed how the UFC had completely restructured his compensation. Most UFC fighters don't get pay-per-view points at all, and the ones who do usually only get $1 to $2 per pay-per-view buy. Conor was getting $3 to $5, which means he was getting double or triple what other top draws earned from the same number of buys, and sometimes way more, if he was expecting a $50 million payday from the Khabib fight. So in some ways, he was getting paid like a partner.
Look at the amount of bread I'm making through the fight game, and I'm not even scratching the surface on what I really probably should be paid, right?
Right.
I mean, like, the back end money is where it's coming through, but it should be guaranteed, right? But I mean, whatever it is, what it is.
You can tell from the way his fights worked out that he also had input on matchmaking, a level of control that other fighters don't really get. And when he returned from time away from the cage, 2016 to 2018 for Mayweather, 2021 to 2024 after his leg break, he kept his status as the biggest draw in the sport. Most fighters lose their rankings and relevance after being inactive for that long. McGregor didn't. In fact, at one point between 2021 and 2022, he was the world's fastest earning athlete, taking just 9 seconds to earn $1 million. But the most unprecedented part of the deal was proper number 12 whiskey becoming an official UFC sponsor. McGregor's brand appeared on the octagon canvas during his fights, which gave him huge advertising exposure across the 6-fight deal. The UFC was now promoting his business alongside their own. He got revenue sharing, matchmaking control, brand integration, and the ability to disappear for years without losing status. Everything except ownership. It was a compromise that worked for both sides. McGregor got paid like an owner without the liability, and the UFC maintained control over the organization. But for Conor, it still wasn't enough. While he was negotiating with the UFC, he was building something they couldn't touch. A business empire that would eventually make him wealthier than fighting ever could.
What excites me now is creating. You know, I like to create the things that I love, like the clothing and that. I'm very much involved in the designs and building things with Reebok and with my company August McGregor, and of course the whiskey and these ventures, and that's what I enjoy doing. So
it almost felt like every time the UFC said no to equity, McGregor went out and built another asset he fully controlled. The first major launch was the Mac Life in 2016. In 2017, obviously there was the fashion brand, but since then he's added a whole lot more strings to his bow, from the Black Forge Inn to Forged Irish Stout. But the biggest was in September 2018, right after signing the 6-fight deal when he launched proper number 12 whiskey.
This is a direct competitor to Jameson. I am coming to take over the whiskey business. Look at the noise it has made. This is a true beast I have in my possession here.
The timing wasn't accidental. Proper number 12 sold 2.4 million bottles in its first 6 months. First year revenue hit $1 billion. The brand became the second largest Irish whiskey in the United States, right behind Jameson. In April 2021, McGregor sold the majority stake to Proximo Spirits for $600 million. His personal share was estimated at around $130 million, which meant from one business venture, he'd made almost as much as the 10 highest paid UFC fighters in history combined for all their fights. But he didn't stop there. In 2023, he launched McGregor Fast, a fitness app with recurring subscription revenue that brings in around $5 million per year. And every single one of these ventures generated income even when he was injured, suspended, or inactive. The whiskey sold whether he fought or not. The fashion line moved product whether he was in the octagon or not. The fitness app kept pulling in subscriptions whether he was training or sitting on a beach. By the time McGregor was ready to return to fighting, the power dynamic had shifted completely.
I'm involved in so many businesses, right? Thriving businesses, but there's no business like the fight business.
He wasn't negotiating from the position of a fighter who needed the UFC's platform anymore. He was negotiating as a businessman who happened to fight occasionally. The UFC had refused to give him equity in their company, so he'd gone out and built his own empire instead. And that empire was worth more than anything the UFC could have offered him. By 2024, his net worth had reached over $200 million. But even then, McGregor wasn't done building. There was one more move that would scratch the ownership itch. In 2024, McGregor announced his ownership stake in the Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship.
The notorious Conor McGregor here. Ladies and gentlemen, the huge announcement that I have for you today. Conor McGregor, myself, and McGregor Sports and Entertainment is now an owner of Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship. Welcome to the big leagues. David Feldman, baby, we did it.
Which meant he now held equity in a competing combat sports organization while still under contract with the UFC. It was something closer to a boxing-style power structure where fighters have genuine alternatives and leverage. The UFC had refused to make him a partner 8 years earlier, so he became a partner somewhere else. The UFC's refusal looked like a smart move at the time. It avoided setting a precedent, keeping fighters from demanding ownership and maintain their control over the sport. But it pushed McGregor to build his own power structure instead of integrating him into theirs. The McGregor blueprint isn't about trash talk or knockout predictions. It's about building so much leverage and so many options that the sport has to meet you on your terms. And in January 2026, that blueprint got tested again. The UFC signed a massive new deal with Paramount that eliminated pay-per-view entirely. Every event would now stream on Paramount Plus with no additional charge to subscribers. For the UFC, it was a windfall, over $1 billion in guaranteed annual revenue. For fighters like McGregor, whose contracts were built around pay-per-view points, it was a disaster. McGregor's entire compensation structure had been based on generating millions of buys. At UFC 229 against Khabib, most of his income was because of his cut of that pay-per-view revenue. Now that revenue stream was gone, so McGregor declared his contract void. He said it publicly on a live stream. His deal was based on pay-per-view sales, pay-per-view no longer existed, and he was due a new contract.
Conor is saying that with the Paramount deal, that voids his contract.
Dana White brushed it off, but you've got to think that behind the scenes, negotiations started pretty quickly, because Conor is still acting like he's going to be fighting at the White House card.
I'm 100%. This is, yeah? We're going in here 100%. I'm going into this fight 100% Conor McGregor, not 92. 100% Conor McGregor. So it has to be really meticulous. We were right there with the last one. As a unit, we do it, right? Let's go, let's go.
Other top fighters like Alexander Volkanovski admitted they had no idea how the UFC would compensate them for the lost pay-per-view points. McGregor wasn't asking. He was demanding a complete renegotiation, and he had the leverage to force it. This is the culmination of everything he'd built over the past decade. The UFC will either meet his terms or watch their biggest draw walk away permanently. Conor McGregor didn't break the UFC's business model by being the best fighter. He broke it by refusing to stay dependent on them. And that changed everything. Conor built an empire by understanding leverage, but there's one thing even the biggest stars can't negotiate their way out of: brain damage. So if you want to see how CTE has destroyed the careers of some of the sport's biggest names, make sure to watch this video next. Thanks for watching.